My guest today on Beyond Loneliness is Miranda Barker. She is a therapist and she specializes in solution focused therapy, among many other. She is a very kind and compassionate human being, and she focuses on helping people who are affected by foster care and adoption. Okay, another conversation. I have Miranda Barker with me. So fortunate to have you on Beyond Loneliness. So I talk about loneliness, talk about human emotions, meditation, and stuff. And your work is also very similar, and you're focused on kids who are affected by foster care and adopted kids. What got you started on this path, Miranda?
That is such a good question.
Okay.
Well, I grew up in a family that adopted, and so I have two siblings that were adopted, and then I kind of wanted to help people in my life, wanted to learn more, and so I set across the path of being a social worker. So I was thinking, okay, I'll work in the nonprofits, I'll work for non-governmental agencies, help, and kind of started out in that world, and then realized, you know, how much change could be had and how much need there was in particularly helping parents learn how to parent. Because I think that for some people, they don't have great examples. Maybe they didn't have parents themselves that could really model that for them. And so I started out kind of in the nonprofit world around adoption and foster care, really kid focused. And then I realized how much more of an effort and how much more of a impact I could have in working more with parents. And so kind of, I like to joke about how I went upstream a little bit. I started working with the parents. I started working with particularly younger parents who were thinking about placing their children for adoption, or maybe they had abuse history themselves, or wanted to parent but didn't really have adults in their life that could help them out. And so I started working with parents in that realm. And it was still kind of on the social work side, helping them get resources, helping connect them with other agencies and organizations, and then doing a lot of teaching. And then I myself became a parent through adoption. So my husband and I decided that we wanted to adopt, and that was how we wanted to grow our family first. And so we actually adopted from India 2 years ago, and we have a beautiful 4-year-old daughter, and she's from Karnataka, and so we've spent a lot of time in India as well. But as I became a parent myself, I realized you kind of go through all these different realizations, right? You grow as a person, you start to kind of come into your own, excuse me, of like, what's my mission and what do I want to be doing? And so I think that as as I became a parent, I decided that I wanted to do less of the social work world, less of like the connecting and more of the mental health space. And so I had finished my master's in social work, was a clinical social worker, and decided that I wanted to do more things in the therapy space. And so you kind of saw this evolution of my career. And now what I do is I'm a therapist, and I work a lot with kids that were in foster care or adoption, adults who placed children for adoption, or new parents that are just trying to navigate how to become a parent. Because most recently, my husband and I also had a baby biologically, so we have one adopted child, one biological child, and to kind of segue back into what this conversation is about. After I had my children, I started to realize how lonely it can be to be a parent, how lonely it can be to try to connect with other parents, and even just the gigantic shift in your identity that happens when you become a parent, and how common it is to then struggle with mental health, struggle with loneliness. And then, so long story short, I feel like I've had a lot of different careers in this short time, and it all has kind of revolved around wanting people to become the best version of themselves, wanting to find support, wanting to help others who are kind of within that like adoption space as well. So yeah, that's what my career has been all about.
Very inspiring, and I think somebody who's watching this should should learn that you just need one little start, good start in your life, and your life can really change the the, the actions that
Yeah.
follows after one good thing can lead your life to an unimaginable space and place. If you just need one good thing to start,
Hmm.
and it looks like you are that example.
Oh, thank you.
You've turned that into a meaningful story,
Hmm.
and you are impacting the world. Um, I wish I had met you earlier. Truly, you're also doing. You also host a podcast, The
Hmm.
Therapist Thriver. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I am a big believer in creativity and being able to bring creativity into every part of your life. I think that for a lot of the clients that I work with that are struggling with mental health issues, whether it be depression, anxiety, PTSD, ADHD, I think everybody can benefit from creativity. And I think that when I myself have struggled with my mental health, I've realized that, like if I'm feeling burnt out or if I am feeling anxious, a lot of times my creativity diminishes. I'm not as creative. I don't pick up the paintbrush. It's almost like when you're struggling with your mental health or when you're struggling with some of these big issues, your brain is in survival mode. And so it's almost needing to have this structured trajectory. It can't really embrace complexity and embrace creativity. And so you kind of find yourself in this vicious cycle where I'm struggling, and so I can't get creative, and so then I kind of continue to struggle. But I think that for a lot of my clients, if you infuse creativity, and I'll kind of define that in a minute, but if you infuse creativity, it can get you out of that cycle because I think that if you are someone who is struggling, you find a way to be creative, you find a way to try to get outside of that survival mode, then sometimes that can disrupt yourself and it can help either process some of the anxiety, it can help be a good coping skill. All that to say, I have realized how important creativity is in my life, whether that be writing or painting or educating. And podcasting became such a cool area of creativity for me. I'm sure you can relate to that, where it feels like you can, when you're podcasting, you're opening up a part of your heart. You're talking to people who are important to you. You're getting to learn. And like you, I'm a very curious person, and I think curiosity and creativity are linked, like they go hand in hand. And so when you feel like you are being curious and learning, it it kind of puts you on like some sort of a high, like you get excited about it. And so a couple years ago, this was right around when I became a parent, I wanted to shift my career and wanted to focus on ways that I could infuse creativity into my career. And sometimes that can be hard. Like if you're working in child protection or if you're working um, as a therapist or you're doing a job that doesn't necessarily have a ton of creativity automatically built in, you have to find ways to do that. And so I was extremely blessed where I started working for a mental health clinic that I was just working for them part-time. And I was talking to some of the leadership one day and I was like, what are some ways that I can get involved? Like I've done podcasting before. I've done writing before. I've made workbooks. And I just had this drive of like, I see that your company is doing something exciting and that you guys are open to creativity. I have some ideas for this. And so they took a chance on me and they allowed me to kind of build this position into what it is now, where I get to create things as a part of my job. And so part of that was coming to them and saying, I want to have a podcast where we talk about these different things. I want to educate other therapists because I when I graduated from clinical social work school, I was excited, but I didn't feel exactly completely prepared to be a therapist. I was like, there's so many different nuances and so many different things that I don't know how to do. And so I was inspired to kind of combine all of these different passions of like, I'm passionate about mental health care, I'm passionate about education, I'm passionate about podcasting, and I'm going to try to combine these and create a resource so that other therapists who are in my position can learn alongside me and get the tools that they need to be successful therapists. And I the funny thing about it is that it was created as a tool for therapists by therapists. However, I quickly realized that everyone is interested in what therapists talk about. They're interested in a lot of the topics that we are covering, whether it be ADHD or different therapy modalities or different diagnoses. Like people, the general public is interested in this stuff too. And so it has kind of grown and evolved into a podcast that, yes, it's for therapists and by therapists. However, it we have a lot of people to listen that are just generally curious about mental health care and generally curious about how they can better themselves and grow. And so just today we came out with a new podcast episode that was all about navigating political anxiety, because for some people, the everything that's going on in politics, I'm in the US, and so in the US, it's our election year and people are really anxious about it, and it's coming up in so many different therapy sessions. And so having this podcast is a way that I can educate others about like, here's how to handle this in sessions, but for clients too, they can listen and be like, okay, here are some skills that I can keep in mind or take forward.
Yeah, I think you've given me so many keywords to talk about. I don't know,
So much.
so much. This is going to be a long conversation. Okay, I want to start with, I don't want to get lost. You said something about loneliness after you became a parent. And this is a real thing. So many people go through it. Big issue, just like political anxiety you mentioned. Do you want to talk about that phase? Were you able to find the other of the end of the thread where it started? Like what was the first experience like?
Yeah.
And how did you navigate? And what can people learn? Because you have had this experience yourself. You are a therapist. You know the inside stuff. How was the manifestation like? I'm really curious.
Yeah. So gosh, I so appreciate that we're talking about this, because I think that people who, people think that they should be happy all the time. People think we are so connected. I mean, you and I are talking in two different countries, two different time zones. We are the most connected that we have ever been in history. And so people feel like they should not feel lonely. And I think it's fascinating how truly lonely people are, and how, I mean, the American Psychological Association just did a survey about how 30% of adults in America have felt lonely in the last week, and 10% of them have felt lonely in the last day. I mean, I think that if we are talking about how so many people feel this way, it starts to normalize it, and people start to realize how they actually have a lot in common with other people. And so all that to say, I think that anytime you go through massive transitions or big changes, it kind of sets you off a little bit. You're like, oh, I don't know, this feels uneasy. Am I doing this the right way? Who are my people? I don't know about you if you have kids or not, but when you become a parent, you're still going to be friends with a lot of people who don't have kids. Similar to like when you get married, you're still going to be friends with a lot of people that are not married. Or, maybe another example of this might be when you are graduating from high school. You graduate, you move on to the next transition in your life, and you're going to have some friends who are following you and doing that too, but you have a lot of friends that aren't. And so I think that naturally you start to kind of have some differences with friends. You're not in the same chapter anymore. And so you start to feel like you're losing some of your friends because they have very different life experiences. And I think that coupled that with this expectation of I should be happy, I should be glowing, I should be the happiest I've ever been, that makes you feel like if you are not happy, if you are not feeling connected, if you're feeling a little off, if you're feeling a little lonely, it compounds and makes you feel like something's wrong with you, or makes you feel like I should be feeling this way. And so I think that when people become new parents, they lose some of their friends. Unfortunately, that's just something that happens. And you hopefully will gain some friends too who are in the same stage of life, but you're going to lose some of that, and you're going to lose some of yourself too. And I think that when your identity shifts, you start to kind of question things. And I think that when I became a new parent, when we adopted my daughter, I don't think I had this giant shift in feeling lonely. I think that I had some friends that had kids. I think that we had anticipated her for so long. And so she kind of slid right in really easily. Like it felt really natural and good. But when I became a mom, when we had our baby biologically, I was suddenly like, I was on maternity leave, and I couldn't leave my bed it was a medical thing. So I had to like stay in bed for a couple of days, a couple of weeks. And it felt like life just kind of moved on. Like everybody just kept going. And I had this realization, a couple weeks after he was born, that like, I haven't seen my friends in a while, or like I am not working right now. And so you start to kind of notice yourself feel more isolated, especially I had him in the wintertime. And so I think it was snowy here. People are not out and about as much as they would be. But I think that it's very normal to feel this shift in your identity. It's very normal to feel some loneliness. And if you feel like you're the only one experiencing that, then it makes you feel even more isolated. And so what I found was helpful, and this is something that I've seen, I mean, this isn't going to be new information or anything, but like when you start to reach out to your friends, or when you start to realize like, oh, I'm actually feeling pretty lonely right now, and you start to kind of even name that, and recognize that other people are also feeling this way, I think that it breaks down some of those barriers and helps you feel a little bit more open to connecting. If I'm sitting here and I assume that you've never been lonely, and I'm feeling lonely, then it makes me feel ashamed, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong. But if I know that you've probably felt lonely at times too, then I am much more apt to reach out and be like, hey, I'm struggling. Like, can we have a phone call, or can we like go for a walk? Or, if I'm reaching out for that connection, then I feel less ashamed, and I feel like I can actually get through it. And so ultimately that was what I did. I remember there was one night after we had the baby, and it was like one of our first outings. We were out at a restaurant with the baby, with our 3-year-old. And I was talking to my husband, and I was like, I miss my coworkers. Like I miss my friends. And like, I'm happy. Like I love my kids, but I'm feeling kind of lonely. I think I need to go visit them. Right. And so in that moment, he was like, that's a great idea. Why don't you text them? Why don't you reach out to them? And so I think being able to identify it and admit when you're feeling this way, and then having people in your life that are, urging you or encouraging you to reach out for support is helpful.
Yeah, really powerful message. And I think what I could, obviously because my work is precisely focused on this, there are 2 words while you were sharing your story, 2 words really got stuck in my head, and I wrote them while I was listening to you. One is belonging, and the second is inclusivity. So it sounds like, and obviously because I listen to people who experience loneliness of all kinds, it, it, it turns out we need to be in a constant state of belonging, even if we are not
Mm-hmm.
interacting with these people. But having that assurance at the back of our minds that I know there is a group, there are people who I belong to, even if we talk to them in 5 months or every week, having that connection
Mm-hmm.
um, is is essential for not just survival, but to thrive and to do really good in life.
Mm-hmm.
And inclusivity, knowing that I am part of something, we share some values, maybe a group,
Yeah.
maybe a number of people I'm connected to, my social relationships and my
Mm-hmm.
professional relationships at workplace. Having that sense of belonging and inclusivity makes you feel that you're not alone, and that, I think, that brings you to the concept that we talk a lot about in meditation, is the idea of oneness. And I
Mm-hmm.
talk about this with everyone, that eventually we are all connected, we are all part of one universe, we are all the same. Isolation in any sense, physical isolation, we experienced that in COVID. uh, and I think we didn't realize that nobody who's alive today had experienced this such kind of isolation.
Yeah.
Even if you hadn't seen people, the the this kind of forced measure that you can't see that person physically
Mm-hmm.
immediately puts you in a state of isolation, and you feel like, God, I need to see that person, or I need to meet that physical energy.
Mm-hmm.
Is really essential for our survival.
Yeah.
Other thing I wrote down is, it's beautiful, and I hope somebody who's watching this learns that picking up the phone and just calling that one person
Mm-hmm.
can do a lot of good. Maybe you are the first one who's initiating that call,
Mm-hmm.
but perhaps that person is also expecting, but maybe doesn't have enough courage to pick up the phone and accept that, hey, I'm feeling so lonely. Can we talk? And like you
Yeah.
said, can we go for a walk?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was reading one article, and this guy, uh, sort of a trend that when we call people, it's like, hey, can we meet for lunch? I want to talk to you about this, my
Mm.
work, my problems. But I always kind of think that, how many times do we call people and say, hey, can we meet and for no reason?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any problems, just so you know. I don't want to talk about my relationship issues, anything, but just meet and
Mm-hmm.
have lunch and absorb that mutual connection, that sense of belonging we share. Um, so it turns out it is a essential human trait, human
Mm-hmm.
value that we must have. But I think we didn't realize it's growing. The need
Mm-hmm.
to belong is growing, particularly in young adults,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't teach them enough about connection. We don't teach them enough about human connection. And
Yeah.
since AI is on the rise, we have so many reasons to be distracted. Um, and I always think about, I ask this question to people, like, when you take your headphones off, when you close your eyes, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people might struggle. People scratch their heads and say, was that really necessary to ask this question? Who am I? Because a lot of people run away from that reality,
Oh yeah.
but it
Well.
chases you wherever you
Mm-hmm.
go.
Mm-hmm. And so much of belonging belonging is so intertwined with self-esteem, and so if you and self-confidence, and so if you don't feel like you belong, if you don't feel like you have people that you can, that will take you at your worst, that will be, they love you no matter who you are, if you don't feel like you belong or you have those people, it greatly affects your self-esteem. And I think that one of the conversations that I had recently, particularly around like political anxiety, even was about how if your beliefs are in conflict with the people who you care about, you feel like that is a broken, that relationship is breaking, then it it makes you feel like you aren't necessarily belonging, and it greatly affects your self-esteem. It greatly affects your self-confidence, and and it has a huge effect on you. And so I think that just on any note, you don't want to think about how your self-esteem is so wrapped up in others. But if you don't feel like you have people that you can rely on or people that care about you, it affects you. It makes you feel even more isolated and alone. And I wanted to speak really briefly to something that you had said about, connecting in person, and even just like connecting to not have anything to talk about. I learned something recently, and I'm not an expert by any means on this, but I learned something that was just like super cool. And I don't know if you're familiar with EMDR or types of therapy that involve bilateral stimulation, but essentially what it means is, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but I learned about how when bilateral stimulation is when your brain is going from back and forth between your right and your left brain. So for example, when you're sleeping at night, your eyes are moving back and forth during your REM cycle. And that scientists believe that that's how you are essentially processing your day, processing your short-term memories into your long-term memories. You're processing things at night through that bilateral stimulation. And so there is a school of thought within mental health and within therapy that believes that if you can mimic that bilateral stimulation while you're having conversations, it helps you process things. So, for example, there's different therapists that will move their finger back and forth and have you follow it as a way of processing while you're talking about traumatic or difficult memories. But on a much smaller scale, they believe that even just moving your body back and forth is kind of mimicking that bilateral stimulation, i.e. walking. And so I don't know about you, but if I am having a bad day, or if I'm having a tough day, or just if I go for a walk, or if I go for a walk with a friend, and that movement of your right and left foot is actually mimicking the bilateral stimulation. And so that's why when you go for a walk and process things, or you're thinking about things while you're walking, or maybe you're, walking next to a partner or a friend and you're talking through these things, your brain is going to feel better because it's mimicking that bilateral stimulation. And that's something that we don't really get when we're talking on screens, or if we're talking on Twitter, or if we're talking on social media. We're not mimicking that bilateral stimulation. And so because of that, we're not processing things the same way. And so I think that there's something to say about, even just if you have to talk on the phone, or if you have to connect virtually, going for a walk while you're doing it, or, connecting with people in person that can it can help you process things in a different way.
That explains why most meaningful conversations happen while you're walking.
I love it. Right.
Yes, and I think it was inherently, it is inbuilt within, those who didn't know about the concept of bilateral stimulation. People ideally would pick, let's go out for a walk if you want to talk about something that's bothering you inside, or you have something that you want to share with someone. It's something heavy, something that's bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it works wonders. For me, I love walking. Particularly, I spend a lot of time in the mountains. That's where I have a sacred space. I meditate there. But also while in the shower, your mind kind of figures out many of the challenges, or many of the things that are so wrapped up in things that you find all mingled up inside.
Mm-hmm.
Shower and walking are two things. For me, I think walking, you've shared, it works for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
This explains why. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, and my husband even is notorious for, if he's trying to process or figure something, he'll pace back and forth in our bedroom, he'll pace back and forth. And I'm always stop pacing, you're driving me crazy. But I shouldn't do that because it's actually helping him process. So it's just kind of a funny brain trick. But
funny and also fascinating that even though we are not aware of the concept, we are still doing it. We still
Yes.
inherently, it's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to go back to a term that you mentioned about relationships and feeling that I am the one, the relation between self-worth and finding if two people share the same values, same warmth, same kind of bonding. So in my work, and this is something I would love your perspective on as well, is like when we discover our own identity. For example, if I have spent enough time contemplating who I am, what are my innate gifts, what are my values, what am I born with naturally, and I have a firm establishment of that identity, other people are naturally going to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of people I will have the strongest bond with will share some of those values, at least
Mm-hmm.
on some levels. And that gives them less flexibility to give me an identity on top of the one that I know is the firm one, is the one I'm truly identifying myself with.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves less room for friction between relationships because you've got two people more or less agreeing on the same identity
Mm-hmm.
that you have discovered for yourself. Um, so in case of loneliness, for example, people who feel that they are not able to bond with other people around themselves, like social relationships, um, I've kind of contemplated this and I've had this experience after working with these people. I've learned that people who lacked a clarity on their own identity are the ones who are most in conflict with others, because then others will try to give you an identity based on their interaction with you, and that is very flexible because our we are not the same all the time. Today I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy, tomorrow I may not be as happy, and your perception will shift. The patterns in my behavior will kind of give you room to be in the position to give me more. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but people who have a strong sense of identity about themselves are the ones who will be in less conflict with other people in
Mm-hmm.
terms of social relationships. Um, what is your perception on people who experience social isolation, social loneliness, like they feel disconnected all the time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that if someone is listening to this episode and they are thinking to themselves like, how do I get a better sense of myself? How do I get a firmer sense of identity? I think that I want them to know that they're first off, they're not alone, because they, exactly like you said, we as humans are always shifting, we're always growing, we're always evolving. Even like I thought that maybe you can relate to this, where it's like I thought I had a really good sense of myself when I was 18, right? I got married super young, thought I knew who I was, and I've grown exponentially since then. And I think that my husband and I have been married for 10 years. We've grown a lot in those years. We've changed a lot in those years. And I think that we, the parts of us that have not changed are the parts that we have in common, like the values, the parts that are, like more integral to our identities. Where I like what you said about like when you take your headphones off and you close your eyes, like who are you at your core? And I think that a lot of people probably can't answer that. A lot of people don't know. And I mean, a similar question that I ask clients a lot is, if you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? People don't know how to answer that, because I think that we don't, well, first off, that those sorts of questions scare people sometimes because they don't want to think about how they are fluid. They don't want to think about how they could change. They don't want to think about how they don't know themselves. But in reality, we are people who will change over time. And I think that if you that's where finding, like your core beliefs is so helpful. And even just finding people who can relate to some of those core beliefs, because again, as those relationships, as you might enter a new chapter of your life, as you might become a new parent, as you might do different things, it's like the stage of your life is in that you the stage of your life that you're in might change, but who you won't. And so I I think it's scary to talk about some of this stuff, and I think that that's exactly what people talk about in therapy usually. And I think that if everybody had a perfect sense of themselves, then I think that I don't know if they would necessarily need as much therapy. I don't know if they would feel as much of the disconnect or from people. But you know, I I do think that even the most self-confident seeming and the people who you picture in your mind as having it all together, like even they struggle at times with what they believe, and even they struggle at times with their identity. And so I think that acknowledging that we are all works in progress and that we're all growing and changing is an important part of kind of navigating some of the self-confidence or like the self-esteem parts of this.
I'm curious about, in your profession, when you talk to people, I also interact with people who've had therapies or different kinds. Um, what what decides the impact of therapy? Like it's so spread out that, like
Mm-hmm.
for example, I was talking to someone, and we offered this personalized conversations, very casual, nothing about therapy. And this guy said, I've been taking therapy for 4 years, and
Mm-hmm.
you reached out to me in the middle of the week asking me, hey, so we sent out a message and said, hey, how was your day? You were talking about watching that movie. How did it go? And this guy sent an email saying what a difference it made to his life, just
Oh.
because somebody was thinking about him,
Mm-hmm.
um, when there was no session planned, there was no conversations
Mm-hmm.
happening. Just a little thought about, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that movie I was gonna watch, and what makes what do you
Mm-hmm.
make out of that?
Yeah. Well, I think that I love that because people want to feel thought of. People want to feel like they are important to someone. And so the fact that you thought of them, reached out to them, of course that had an impact on them because they thought, oh, I mean, I think, I don't know about you, but I like when somebody reaches out and says, I thought of you, like that's such a warming thing. And it makes you feel important. It makes you feel like you belong. Again, kind of goes into some of that self-esteem stuff. But the interesting thing about therapy is that, and I myself have been in therapy before too, and the part that's the most like the biggest indicator of if therapy is going to be helpful is if you feel connected to your therapist. And if you feel like you, at the company I work with, we talk about vibing with your therapist, and we say like if you vibe with them, then it could be a good fit. But if you feel like maybe they're not the right fit, then it's really going to impact they could be the best therapist in the world. They could have the best ideas, they could have the best interventions, but if you don't feel like it's a right fit, or if you don't feel like they, again, like have some stuff in common with you, then it's not going to be helpful. And I think that we there are some people who look for therapists that are maybe older or wiser than them, or people who have different values, or different, there's all sorts of things that go into like what might not be a good fit of a therapist. But one of the reasons why therapy is so helpful is because you get a chance to process things with a professional. And I mean, if I were to go downstairs and say, husband, I have stuff I need to talk about, like, let's talk about it. He's going to have opinions. He's going to, I mean, he's the best listener in the world, but he's still going to, pipe in with what his thoughts are, or he's going to, be on my side, or, just all these different things. But when you are talking to a therapist, it's someone who is neutral. It's someone who is, they're they're not piping in with your opinions. Actually, it's not a very good thing for a therapist to be giving you advice like a friend would. And some of that goes into, like, if I was your therapist and I told you, oh, well, you should quit your job, or you should do this. And then if you didn't do that, that would make you feel kind of maybe ashamed, or make you wouldn't want to admit that to me. And so it automatically kind of puts our relationship not at ease. And so when you are, and that's why it's so important for a therapist to just be asking you questions to help you process things, because they want you to kind of come to your conclusions. And all that to say, I think that for some people who are just needing therapy to, like, process things, like, yeah, having a therapist to kind of talk through stuff, just to, like, have someone who's neutral and doesn't have a horse in the game, isn't going to have a lot of opinions, can be helpful, just to kind of have that person to bounce things off of. But then for other people who are, really struggling with their mental health, and they don't feel like they can talk to their friends about it, or, I had a therapy session this morning with a woman who, she has a really poor relationship with her mother. And so what she talks a lot about in therapy is, I cannot, all of my friends have these great relationships with their moms. They don't understand. I can't talk to them about this, because they just tell me to, like, reach out to her, or to kind of, they don't understand. And so I think that to be able to talk to a professional who has some expertise around how your brain works, how you can best process things, and also just is able to listen and not provide things back, then that's really valuable. I think one other thought on that too is, I'm not a therapist with my friends, and the difference with that is that if I'm talking to a client, I'm not talking about myself. I'm not talking about my kids. I'm not talking about my experiences. I'm not saying, like, oh, well, I had that happen and this is how that happened. And for a friendship, you need that back and forth. You need to be able to share your experiences and also feel like you're giving some level of self-disclosure. And so I think for a lot of people, like, having a friend that they can talk to about this stuff is all they need. And for other people, they need more support and more expertise, or someone who doesn't have any opinions to be able to talk to them about that stuff. And so that's when therapy is helpful.
Yeah, I think no two journeys are the same. Some people are in different phases of their lives. Have you ever thought about or considered, within therapy, how do you evaluate, how do you judge that the person might need more than therapy or something different? One,
Yeah.
because when we speak with people who've either tried therapy and maybe they can't afford it, maybe for some reason they're sort of trying some alternatives. What we do is we try and give them that space and talk about meditation, and then definitely guide them through. Do you think there can be a possibility, or are people using this infusion of sense of compassion? Obviously, therapists have compassion, and that's what gets them in the profession, I think, in the first place. But really a visible factor that, okay, we're not doing therapy, we are just sitting here having a conversation, and I'm here, the same element that I mentioned earlier, that I'm really interested in learning about you, staying within that professional zone, but in the spotlight, there's nothing but compassion. There's nothing but I want to listen to your story. Um, does that make a difference to people? Have you experienced this with your clients, or do you try that?
Sure. I think that, yeah, I mean, I think that having compassion and coming at it in a professional standpoint is going to look different, and it's going to be, they're going to find helpfulness. But you're right, it is like every person's journey is different. And I think on that note, or what you were just saying, I truly believe that if more people meditated and if more people were open to being vulnerable with the people in their lives, I don't think that you would see as many people in therapy. Listen, I love therapy. I think it is so helpful and I think it's great. And I think that there are some people that truly, absolutely need therapy. But I do think that some of therapy is providing that connection and also holding people accountable to doing the coping skills like meditation that they need to be doing. And so I think if people were, I think for some people who maybe have more minor mental health needs, like if they're just anxious or if they're, experiencing more minor symptoms, if they were to do meditation and if they were to kind of do some of these coping skills themselves or have really valuable connections, I don't think they would need therapy. And as a therapist, I think like I would love it if more of my clients did those things. And so then they wouldn't need to talk to me about, so I think that every journey is different, but the, and people, some people need that level of accountability. Some people need that level of connection or relationship. But I do think that like there are so many different ways to get that. That's not only therapy too.
Yeah, and I think that proves the point that most people, if not everyone, goes through a phase which is a silent phase in a way. Uh, in that zone, in that phase, if they had meditated or tried some contemplative exercises, meditation is really powerful, but
Mm-hmm.
some other form similar to meditation, that silent phase wouldn't be kind of transiting to a space in life where they definitely need therapy versus they might or might not need therapy, and some things could have been prevented. Um, what a huge impact that would make on the world.
Totally agree. Mm-hmm.
Economy, community, quality of life, happiness,
Mm-hmm.
so many other factors. Education, because we
Mm-hmm.
are all connected in that circle. Um, how would you, if let's say, same question that you ask people, if you have all the power to do anything, how would you make that possible? Can we do that?
I guess I'm not quite understanding your question. Like
Right.
how to do that or
Let's say if people were listening to you and we put a point across that, okay, therapy is great and everything, yes,
Mhm.
it works for a lot of people, but we all have that phase in life where if we meditated just to be aware of our thoughts, just to be more present, more conscious,
Mhm.
um, you would be in a much better position in terms of living a quality life, in terms of so promoting the notion, painting a picture that everyone should meditate, at
Mhm.
least to some extent.
Mhm.
Um, and because it's my work and I come across people, and people, I think, have a wrong picture of meditation. People
Mhm.
think it is either for those, it's very difficult, number one.
Mhm.
I will talk about that later. But if we were to promote meditation on a community level, what could we do?
Mm. When I talk with my clients about meditation, a lot of times what they need to do to start is more like guided meditations because I think that um, this is all similar to some of the stuff that we talked about previously too, where people are they they can be fearful of times at times of their own thoughts or of their own of like not knowing themselves. And I think that there's an aspect of meditation where you need to be comfortable with silence. You need to be comfortable with kind of sitting with your own thoughts. And if you are not comfortable with that, if you are not comfortable with like that vulnerability, it makes you feel it can be scary for a lot of people, because just talking and talking and talking and distracting yourselves and doing these different things is easier. It's more comfortable. And so for some of my clients, I mean, for a lot of my clients, what I'll do is I'll say, let's start out with guided meditations, whether it be the Headspace app or the Insight Timer. There's so many great resources for guided meditations. And that's really just to kind of practice keeping your thoughts not under control, but just like noticing your thoughts and being able to guide your thoughts. And so I think that that's a good way to kind of start. And then over time, they can get, as they're more comfortable with their identity, as they are able to even just like be more vulnerable with themselves, I think that meditation comes more comfortably or easier. And I'm not an expert in meditation. I wish I did it more. I should do it more, because I know that it's so helpful. And I think that the cool thing is that, we were talking about how our bodies naturally do some of this stuff and then the science later says, oh, this is helpful, like bilateral stimulation. We naturally do some of that stuff. And then later the science says, oh, that was really good for you. And I think similarly, meditation is something that, I mean, we've been doing for thousands and thousands of years. It's something that people have done. And then the science now says, oh, that's actually really helpful. This is why. And so I think that for some people, it feels like this, ancient thing, or it feels like something like a waste of time. But in reality, like research says that it's so beneficial. And that's something that I tell my clients too, where it's like, listen, we can process things, we can talk through what's going on in your life. And yes, research says that therapy is helpful. If this is not helpful, we can talk about medication. Research says that this thing can be helpful for you. Like we'll always go back to the science, and meditation is one of those coping skills that I will always be pointing my clients to as well, because again, like the research doesn't lie. It's something that says this is helpful.
Absolutely. And I think, so I can recall a story, something you mentioned earlier about that emptiness people fear a lot. And obviously meditation works if it's not commercialized to an extent that, we say it's only going to work if you buy my program, or it's only going to work if you do this. It is relatively very simple, but it is very effective. So in my experience, like young adult, we were in middle of a session, and it was a contemplative meditation, basically questioning and looking at yourself with a sense of curiosity and discovering yourself and your thoughts and analyzing them. It's like you have a spotlight and you're walking through your own warehouse of thoughts and see what's there. And somebody who didn't find anything, absolutely nothing, it backfired. And it was not just one-off event. It has happened on multiple occasions. And so, not to imply that it doesn't work, but it may work so well that it may backfire. That sense of emptiness, then I wonder, where did it start? When did we become so empty or so fearful of ourselves? Like not even the phrase I said about taking off your headphones. It's like, are we? And yesterday I was having a conversation. I mentioned that the same thing. It might sound repetitive to me that every idle moment a phone is pulled out, no matter where you are. If you are in the middle of conversation, if you have one opportunity, say 5 seconds, you would put out your phone. And I don't know what we are looking for. Maybe we are. I have no idea what we're looking for. But is it so uncomfortable? particularly for young adults, to sit in the company of their own thoughts
Mm.
and their own self, that it's so boring. And then how are we so delusioned, if we are, if that's not a strong word, that we believe that other people are going to enjoy our company. We want other people to be friends with us. Yeah. But if we don't enjoy our own company, how, what are other people going to find that we cannot find
Yeah, yeah.
inside us?
Hmm.
And they will look for it. They want to be your friend because they want something from you, obviously.
Hmm.
We all want something from each other. You
Hmm.
respect me, I give you respect, you give me
Hmm.
a sense of belonging, compassion,
Hmm.
kindness. If we don't see that within us, how are other people going to find that?
I
So,
mean, that's such a good metaphor and such a good question too, around like connecting with yourself. Like, I think that sometimes we think that we need to distract ourselves because don't we don't want to just sit with ourselves. And then on the other hand, I think we often feel like we need to distract ourselves because if we don't, then we will be hit with uncomfortable feelings or memories or things. And so, um, you know, when you spoke about the metaphor or like the warehouse of thoughts and the emptiness, I think that if I was sitting with a client and they were talking about that, or they were, you know, experiencing some of that emptiness, I think one of the questions that I would ask them, and I'm a solution focused therapist, that's the type of modality that I usually practice within. And I think one of the questions that I would ask them is, well, when was the last time you didn't feel empty? Or what are things that make you feel alive? What are some things that make you feel this is worth it? What are the things that give you hope? And trying to look at some of those like shining moments or the exceptions, I think is a good place to start, because I guarantee you they were not that way as children. They didn't have an emptiness within them. I think that it's something that grows over time, or something that has happened to us. But I think that I would start there by wanting to look at what are times where you felt alive or felt more of those shining moments. And then I think I would also challenge them and say, like, if you, I don't know, I'm having a hard time with them saying there's like, I get the empty feeling, I get the lonely feeling, but I'm going to challenge you, because I do think that there's something there. And I think that um, there are people that enjoy your company. Why do you think they enjoy your company? Like, what do you think what do they like about you? Like, what are you, I think even just trying to find people's strengths. And even a good question to ask around that, again, a solution focused question would be, putting yourself in someone else's shoes of like, I do this with kids a lot, where else if I ask them, what do you like about yourself? Or, like, what are your strengths? It's so hard for kids to come up with things like that. But if I say, what would your mom say is your favorite thing about you? Or what would your grandma say is the thing that she loves most to do with you? Or, as soon as you take yourself out of the equation and you ask about, like, what do you think your friends like about you? Or why do you think they keep, spending time with you? People can usually come up with something. Or maybe they'll say, I don't know. And I'm like, well, then let's call them up and ask them, because I think that goes into another point of like, we don't share our feelings with people enough. We don't encourage people enough. We don't tell them what we love about them enough. And I think that if somebody were to ask my daughter, like, what does your mom love about you? And if she had a hard time coming up with that, then I feel like I would have failed. Like, no, she should be able to come up with a million things immediately. Like, oh, my mom says that she loves this about me. You know what I mean? And so I think that
absolutely.
it's another small point, but
Yes. In fact, I think about 3 years ago, we did a quick study. And so we called about 20, 25 parents, and we put two chairs separately at different rooms. And uh, in one room, all kids, and the other room, all the parents. And we had two cameras placed. And we asked the kids that, what do you think your mom is going to say is your favorite thing to do?
Cute. Yeah.
And surprising answer. So we asked the same questions to the parents and the kids. And I think in about 60-70%, the answers were completely different. So the mom would say, my child loves to go shopping with me. And they said, no, I love to help my mom in the kitchen.
Cute.
And yeah, so that putting yourself in their perspective is a hard thing, but I think it's a teachable skill. Foundation could be more conversations, perhaps. But I do want to come back to the point that we were talking about, the sense of emptiness. In my experience, like, it has a lot to do with the amount of patience we have, because patience also builds up with practice. That when you begin to scratch the surface of yourself, when you're contemplating yourself and looking for things, we give up too soon. Like the first empty wall, no paintings, no picture, no decorations on that wall. You see, I am defined by that emptiness. Some people assume that, and then the self-worth takes a nosedive, and we give up. We turn around and say, okay, that's the end of it. But human mind and human experiences are so profound and so deep that one experience or one image or one visualization cannot define us. So if you have enough patience to keep digging, eventually you're going to hit something beautiful. And this may, I'm not speaking with data, I'm speaking from a belief, and this may or may not be true, is that I don't think nature would discriminate between us. I don't think nature would make one person beautiful and other person empty. We are all born beautiful, aren't we? And then maybe your experience would sort of pile up and hide that beauty that we are all born with, and we give up too soon. Like, that may be me. So sad to see myself. And some people sort of turn around. I wish people, if somebody who's listening to it, you've got to have this attitude that I am not going to stop until I find that beauty in myself. And we all have that. But some people are convinced that they don't have that.
Well, and I think on that point, I had a supervisor a long time ago tell me that as professionals, sometimes we need to hold the hope for our clients, and sometimes we need to hold the good things, because if they're having a hard time finding the good things, or if they're having a hard time finding the hope, they need to be able to find that in us. And so I can think of so many clients that I've had that have trouble coming up with good things about themselves, or have trouble, having the patience to look within them. And I think that even if they have the sense that I know they will find something, and if they are able to borrow some of the hope from me, that's going to help them find more patience. And even what you just said around, like, you believe that nature would not discriminate. And that's hope. You have that belief. And I think that if clients, or if people talking to you hear you say that, then I think that it also gives them some inspiration to keep looking, and to, again, it's in another way, you're holding the hope for them and that belief.
I think as guides, as therapists, and in my case as a teacher, we sometimes, like, you need to hold that torch, that flashlight for them, or sometimes you hand over the flashlight to them and say, "I'm going to do some digging for you," and
Yeah.
you do their work, and it's that's what compassion is. That's what
Mhm.
um, giving back is, and I think sometimes people don't see the belief that you are able to see. Um, I
Yes.
that you're just letting them borrow your perception, the
Mhm.
point of view that you
Mhm.
have, and that can have a lifelong impact on somebody. And say, people don't forget that. I get. So there was a girl. So I coach people. I used to, and I still do that. Not very often now. Um, a girl from another Asian country, very poor, and she was. So it's a UN project that I volunteered for, and so I was teaching her, and she did not see. She was studying electrical engineering, and in her master's degree, so she wanted to do something for girls to teach them coding, programming languages.
Mm.
So we wanted to build a website so girls who are not as fortunate as she was would study and maybe acquire some knowledge and build some skill. Um, I was able to see what she was not able to see in herself. So I let her borrow my perception
Mhm.
through conversations and instilling that belief. Um, so we did that. So it was about an 8 month project. So I had to guide her for 8 months. This May or April, so I get a voice message from that girl, and she said, "Sir, I got my PhD scholarship in University of Illinois from a poor Asian country, completely funded scholarship,
Wow.
and she's on top of the moon."
Hmm.
And she says, "I'm not going to forget. This is all because of you."
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's I am not. I'm not putting myself in a position where I can do wonders. It's just that little thing. I think I was just a medium. It was about supposed to happen. She would have
Mhm.
found somebody else. But that one little idea that maybe let her borrow my perception for some time,
Yeah. Mhm. That's a
and that
perfect example. Mhm.
it can change somebody's world.
Mhm. If you
So
believe in someone. Mhm.
yes, yes. And so, everybody who's watching this, my intent would be, if you're experiencing loneliness, isolation, emptiness, whatever,
Mhm.
low self worth, is maybe find someone who would see what you cannot see.
Mhm.
Because maybe we are looking in the wrong direction, maybe we are not looking hard enough, or
Or getting impatient.
getting impatient, or the light
Mhm.
is not strong enough.
Mhm.
Let someone be that light in your life. And so that's what my work is about. um, be the light in people's life so they can also see what you can see,
Mhm.
the sense of hope and optimism, and
Yeah.
give someone some belief, instill some belief in people.
Mhm.
I want to talk to you about meditation for therapists. So it's one of the projects that we just started doing. So within my company, I hire and train psychologists. They know
Hmm.
their stuff. I teach them meditation because I
Very
work.
cool.
We kind of give them this sort of expand their um, skill set and what they can offer to their clients. So I teach them meditation and how they can use that into their practice and kind of that. Surprisingly, and so I had this one rule that, okay, I'm going to give you all my time, all my energy. The only thing is, you are not supposed to learn because you have to teach others. You are
Mm.
expected to apply this into your life and come back and then share that experience, because then
Mm.
people will find it authentic and it will be impactful. And it has worked wonders. I'm
Mhm.
wondering what your opinion is on this. Do you think it's going to work?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, so a couple years ago, I used to teach at a university, and one of the things that I learned as a teacher was how when if people are learning content with the expectation that they need to teach it, that content will stick. And so if you are going into something, if you're learning meditation with the expectation that you then have to turn around and show your clients, they're going to learn so much better. They're going to actually stick and take in the concepts. And so, I mean, I think that putting that out there right out of the gate and saying, you know, you're going to have to then use this is what's going to help them actually learn. And I think that I think it's similar for meditation, but also for a lot of therapy modalities, is that in learning how to do these things, you're having to apply it to your own life by default. I'm not going to teach you how to, you know, like ride a horse without actually knowing how to ride a horse. I'm not going to teach you. There's no way I could teach you meditation without actually practicing it myself. Like you have to, and I think that being able to share your own experiences with it is what also helps people connect to the importance of doing it. And so I love that. I mean, I think that it's important to learn and pass on the concepts that are helpful to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think after all, compassion fatigue is real. For therapists, you also need to recharge and
Yes.
have a balanced life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk to you about. I think this is one of the last thing I want to learn your perspective about is young adults. Their mental health. Do you have patients, clients as in that age group, 18 to 25,
Mm-hmm.
and do you see some patterns? Do you see what is going on? Because the reason I'm asking that question is there was a research done and it found that 18 to 25 age group, 60% of those young adults were almost always to always lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a huge number. So imagine every other young adult you're meeting
Mm-hmm.
is fighting a battle, and it's not visible on the surface. You know,
Yeah.
I was reading some Quora questions and comments, and people say things like, "I feel like people are walking through me.
Mm.
I feel like I'm surrounded by people. I'm shouting, and it feels like they're not even listening."
Mm-hmm.
What is going on? Do you have experiences with young adults? I'd
Yeah,
love to know.
most of my clients are like university age, young adult age. Like that's the majority of the people I work with currently. Um, you know, I'm not a researcher, so I can't speak to this like conclusively, but when you look at the research, I've read the same thing where it's like Gen Z is, 60% of them have experienced loneliness, which is the highest of any generation currently. I also think that the amount of time that they spend on their phones and social media is astronomical. Like, I think the average amount of time that a person in that age group spends on their phone is like between 4 and 5 hours a day. And so I think that you see this growth of like people are spending more and more time virtually on social media, connected in different ways, but just in that way. And then you also are seeing the height or like the rising levels of depression and anxiety and ADHD and these different mental health diagnoses that have loneliness and isolation as a symptom and a part of those diagnoses. And so, I mean, like one of the major symptoms of depression is that you're isolating yourself. You're spending more time in your room. You're not around others. Additionally, with ADHD, it's like people struggle with loneliness all the time when it comes to ADHD because maybe they're not picking up on social cues, they're forgetting people's birthdays, they're interrupting others, things like that. But I I don't know the cause, but I think that we cannot avoid the fact that we're seeing all of these other things also increase. We're seeing social media use increase. We're seeing cell phone use increase. We're seeing real life in-person connections decline. We're seeing mental health issues increase. And we're also seeing loneliness increase, which is wrapped up in a lot of those different mental health diagnoses. And so I think that we talk about how Gen Z is the most connected, but I would argue that they are probably the least connected of a lot of the generations, because they are not connecting in the right ways, I guess. It's hard to be vulnerable over Twitter. It's hard to be, actually have a true connection with somebody that you're just sharing photos with, versus actually having real conversations with.
Do you think the definition of connection has been so modified that on the name of connection, let's say if you're promoting some social media platform and say, this is one wonderful way to connect with your friends you care about, people you care about, but that's a very good marketing phrase for that company, isn't it? But
people want connection.
Yeah. So you're using the same words. You're not inventing new words. You're just altering the meaning of those words without making people feel uncomfortable with invention of new words. So if you tell me, hey, this is one beautiful way, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever else, is one beautiful way to stay connected with people you care about. But can you please define connection? And if you do, can we both agree that it's the same kind of connection that humans need? So connection can be virtual, connection can be in person. You're saying this is a new alternative, new tech revolution that is going to replace the authentic human connection that we all crave, that is built inherently into our DNA. We crave that, right? But
we crave deep connection, but what these people are marketing and pushing is shallow connection, like staying connected to 1,200 people.
Yes.
I can't have deep connections with 1,200 people, but it is changing the meaning of the word just to be more and more shallow, it seems like.
Yeah, and so I think of social, not that it's a bad thing, it's a good tool, but I think of it as a stage where people come and perform for for a few hours, few minutes, and or maybe share some moment of their perfect trained performance for other people to view, because we want to be liked, we want to be followed, we want to be connected, all at the cost of this genuine connection that there's no alternate, there's no equally good alternate to,
because there's no vulnerability happening. There's no vulnerability. You're not being vulnerable on social media, usually not. You're not showing the work in progress, you're showing the final performance, and
absolutely.
And the connection, the true connection that we need is actually in that vulnerability and in that like lead up, I guess. But
absolutely. I wish that changes. I wish we could make people more aware of the real. All you have to do is define connection. That's it, I think. And say, hey, you're using that fine, but try using that to tell people that I want to meet you tomorrow, or let's, if you're part of a group, and say, okay, all 10 of us, let's meet tomorrow, and so use it, and then post those pictures and say we had such a good time because we met, we shared energies and vibes and moments. And the UK has a Minister of Loneliness for years now. Japan has that. I think Germany also has it. And the job of that minister is to create policies to promote connection, community engagement and stuff. I don't know the impact. I don't know how well it has worked. But I feel, because I have experienced it myself, so if there was a Minister of Loneliness here in India, I wouldn't blame the minister. I wouldn't blame anyone for not making strong enough policies, but it's like it doesn't reach the last mile. It's a highway that you're building, but I live a mile off that highway, and before I could take that highway, I need some support, like on that individual level. And I think most people who experience that would agree. Uh, I'm fine with you promoting, you turning libraries into, a place for bonding and connection, or public parks and stuff like that. But even though that needs a cultural shift, but to reach that last mile, what are you going to do? How would you reach individually? Like, government cannot do that. It's that sense of inspiration or maybe hope that we somebody like I feel, so I am doing this work, my organization does this work, that
Mm-hmm.
we want to be your companion, and from the place where you are, no matter where you are you're in your life, until you reach that highway where you feel confident enough to make a call or make friends or participate in functional society,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reasons. But that last mile work is a lot. It's a lot. There are hundreds of millions of people. Um, I would love to know your perspective.
I mean, I think that it's a lot of people know this stuff. Like a lot of people know they feel lonely or they know that they should get off of social media and that they should connect in person. Like I think that we know these things. But it's the discomfort that's keeping us from taking that extra step and meeting them. But I think that that's where I personally would ask them questions around like, okay, is what you're doing enough? Like what is that extra mile that you need to be taking? Or like I don't think it's the government's role necessarily to try to do this, but I also think that um, they could, or we could, and the greater we could be asking ourselves or asking people, like, is this enough? Or like, what what is the extra step that would get you there? And I think that listening to podcasts like this that normalize these feelings and even educating yourself on what is actually helping you feel connected, what actually fills you up and makes you not feel empty inside, and having some self-reflection in that. Um, and then truthfully having like the courage to be more vulnerable and to actually take the step of joining. Like, I mean, there's, so for example, next week there is a big like community holiday that is called National Night Out, and it's where all of the neighborhoods have their own little gatherings. And um, I have I moved to this community like almost 10 years ago, and I was new to the community. I didn't know anybody, and I didn't want to go to this. I'm like, I don't know, like it's nerve-wracking to go somewhere where you don't know anybody. And like, yes, we know it would be helpful to meet people in our neighborhoods and to get to know people, but I don't know, that's uncomfortable. And and then years later, well, a couple of years later, I was living in the neighborhood again that had this gathering, and one of our other neighbors personally invited me. He was like, "You should come. This is fun. Like this is a good way to meet people." And so then we went. Fast forward to this year, my husband and I are hosting one of those for our neighborhoods. And so it's it, all that to say, like, I think that you can have the right structures in place. You can have these neighborhood events. You can have this be a community holiday, but what actually gets people to step outside of that and attend some of these things might be enough self-reflection of like, I need this, or coupled with the courage to actually do it, or sometimes like it's that personal invitation that's necessary. And so I think that um, a lot of this goes back to though normalizing how everybody feels this way, and how um, if you I think that person who invited us to go a couple of years ago, like that was what I needed in order to actually go. And so I think that um, that took courage for them to invite me to, you know, it's just, I think it comes with some knowledge and self-reflection around like, this is what's necessary for connection, like true connection. And then also the courage to actually take the step forward, because it's so much easier to just scroll on Facebook or, you know, scroll on TikTok when that's touted or advertised as enough connection. But, you know, we need more than that.
Yeah, I think maybe just a little push, or it's like a group of people dancing and somebody pulls you, and you're shy in the beginning, and it's like,
Yeah.
maybe I'm okay watching you guys dance, but once you're part of it, then you invite other people. So I tell people it's like, you know, starting a jet engine. You need external blow of air to, you know, spin the turbines, and then once it's spinning fast enough, then it kind of propels itself.
Yeah.
So maybe, and that's what got me started in the first place. Like, people may be waiting for someone to reach out to them and say, okay, I know you need help. I know it's difficult to accept, acknowledge, process, seek help, and seeking help makes you feel that, you know, maybe people think we are looked upon as, you know, we are weaker, or somebody in need or desperate to talk, or whatever they may think. But one little push can change their life.
Definitely.
Maybe somebody who's watching this is your chance to push. Okay. How does your day go by? Like, how do you plan your day, or do you start? What is the first and last thing you do?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, so in the mornings, my husband and I kind of stagger our work schedules. So so I'm with the kids in the mornings, and so I usually wake up and I hang out with them for a little while, get them breakfast, hang out, and then we have a babysitter come or a nanny come and hang out with them for a little while both of us are working. And then my husband usually gets off early. But so work just really varies for me every day. I mean, I do a lot of podcast recordings. I do usually around 5 or 6 therapy appointments a week. And then a lot of my time is spent working with our marketing and creative team and, you know, creating stuff for them, like digital products or digital social media posts, or, you know, brainstorming and coming up with different ideas for that sort of stuff. And then at nighttime, it's like I usually try to spend as much time outside as possible. If there's a day that goes by where I didn't spend any time outside, I usually just don't feel great. I feel like I've missed something. And so usually that will mean, like, you know, going for a walk with our dog, or going on a walk to the park, or something like that. I think that now that we have kids, our days feel a little bit more routine, where it's like, you know, we have to get them in bed by a certain time. And so usually it's just having somewhat of a routine at night. And that's helpful in kind of keeping our sanity, keeping things moving. But it really varies day to day. I mean, my job is completely different every day. And but it's especially nice in the summertime, because I feel like we try to spend a lot of time outside. So, yeah.
Nice, beautiful. Okay, what would be the concluding remark? What would be your message to people?
That's a good question. I feel like we've talked about so much.
I can keep going. So, you know, it's like you get into the zone, flow. You don't keep track of time. I just looked at the clock, and it's like over an hour. I can keep going, and this is so good.
Yeah, this is great. I guess for anyone that's listening, I would want them to take away from this conversation that everyone feels lonely sometimes, and that the feelings that you're feeling are normal, but also there are ways that you can disrupt that loneliness and disrupt some of those mental health symptoms or struggles. And sometimes that means getting outside, being creative. But a lot of times, what that means is having true, deep, wonderful connections with people. And if you're struggling to find those connections, then I would encourage people to look outside of social media, or like what you said, use social media as a way to make plans outside of the app, whether it be going for a walk or getting coffee. Or I think that I I would also want them to listen to this and know that it's okay to admit that you're feeling lonely. It's okay to admit that you're struggling, because more likely than not, there are people in your circle that are also struggling. And so sometimes you need to be the person that reaches out to them. Sometimes you need someone to reach out to you. But if you find the courage to make that first step, it's usually worth it.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message, and I hope it reaches to everyone who needs to hear it. I always tell people that, if you're struggling, imagine that you're at a river. You're like, sometimes you're flowing way too fast. Sometimes you're calm. Sometimes, but you're flowing. You're moving, and moving is life. You don't want to be still. So if you're struggling, that means you're going on. You're going through something, and if it's hard now, it's going to be calm a little later.
True.
Beautiful
Awesome.
conversation, Miranda. This is
Yes,
so good.
thank you.
Well, we should do some. We should do some outside the podcast, because I always intend people to, like I said about social media, to go outside the podcast and make some real, apart from what this podcast will do, some real work. We should host some meditation sessions for people may benefit from
Oh,
it.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love
keep
to
me
do that.
updated. And I'll let you know next time I'm in New Delhi.
Definitely, please. Yes. Thank you. All right. Wonderful talking to you.
You too. Thank you so
Beautiful.
much.